All right, good morning. Lieutenant Nick Butler here, filling in for Sam. He's unable to be here today. I'm going to turn it over to Chief Toom to talk about the officer-involved shooting.
Hey, Sioux Falls police officers were dispatched to a business in the 4100 block of West Keenan to assist Minnehaha County deputies. Deputies were on scene on a call there, and in the course of that call, the subject produced a knife, prompting an emergency call for assistance, of which the Sioux Falls Police Department responded to. Officers arrived on scene, and deputies were attempting to negotiate with the subject, who had at this point become armed with two knives. Numerous attempts were made in negotiations and communications to get him to drop the knives, and those were unsuccessful. At one point, less lethal options were used. They were also unsuccessful. And then as the event continued to proceed, subject made a movement towards officers, and two officers discharged their firearms. Subject then complied with dropping the knives, at which point immediate medical aid was given to the subject, and that subject was transported to the hospital for treatment. As in all officer-involved shootings, kind of gone through this before, the officers involved will be placed on administrative leave, and the investigation will be turned over to DCI, as has been the case in the past, for impartial look at that investigation. And so, as you know, in the past too, we're limited as to what questions we can answer, because now it has been completely turned over to DCI, and it'd be inappropriate for us to comment too much further beyond the basic facts of the event. And we will look for their report, which should come out, and typically within the next month is when that report will come out.
Are you able to expand on what less lethal options were used?
Yeah, 40 millimeter launchers, which is our standard launcher for less lethal. So,
What does that fire?
a sponge round.
Sponge round.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Can we expound on the location anymore?
Just based off what privacy rules and things that are there, just going to say that block of West Cayman. So
The incident unfolded inside the building, though,
Yep.
correct?
And there were some concerns with inside the building as that was going on, is there were other people occupying the building. And so there was a multiple kind of dimension there, as we had one individual, but then other people that had to be moved to safe locations while that was all unfolding.
To clarify, Sioux Falls PD was assisting the sheriff's office. The subject matter with the subject with the knives is the same subject that was involved in the initial call.
Correct, that the deputies were dealing with.
What
So
was the nature of the initial call that deputies were dealing
I
with?
can't comment on the initial nature of that call. So
Where did the weapons come from? Can you talk about that at all?
unknown as to where he produced. The DCI investigation will be able to provide where exactly those knives came from.
What kind of knives were they? Can you talk
I
about
haven't, as far as our involvement in it, I don't even get that far into it. It's just submit it over to them, and then they'll take it from there.
So you may not be able to answer this, but were the knives on his person initially? Like,
Yeah, they
when
were.
you guys arrived on the scene, or did
He had knives in his hand. So,
How old was he?
let's see. Yeah, born in 82. That's what it was.
And what is his current condition? Were the injuries
Unable
severe?
to comment, but taken to the hospital for treatment, and unable to release his name, as there has been still at that status. So
still in the hospital?
just all I can say is taken to the hospital for treatment, that kind of stuff.
How come a taser was not potentially used?
So I will speak in generalities. Tasers have limitations, and in some circumstances, an impact launcher is better. In some circumstances, a taser is a more appropriate tool. So there's a variety of tools, and sometimes environmentally, the taser just isn't able to be deployed. I think we've kind of talked about some of taser's limitations in the past. Additionally, depending on, we've covered this in the past too, on tasers, the success rate, depending on the nuance of how those probes are deployed, is somewhat, it all goes into the decision-making process when officers are trying to determine which tool to use at that moment, which is why it's good to have a variety of less lethal tools. Our officers have access to the 40 millimeter sponge round launchers, the tasers, pepper spray is an option sometimes, the baton. So when you have kind of a variety of options to choose from, you can kind of choose what's best for the situation.
And to be clear, two officers are on leave now.
Yep, 2 officers fired their firearms.
Can you talk a little bit about the use of the non-lethal force and leading up? And I know officers don't want to use that lethal force unless they really have to.
Yeah, it really is. And part of the reason we've even expanded our less lethal options to this 40 millimeter capability because of the opportunity it provides, because I think it's important to stress that a confrontation like this is not one that we desire at all. It really is one that we seek to avoid. And we try to use that less lethal option as a way to not have it get to the point where firearms are used when at all feasible, because sometimes there's time and space, sometimes there's not. And so, again, we know that these less lethal options are there. We've used them in the past. Sometimes they're very effective in getting compliance. Other times, depending on either motivation, pain tolerance, a variety of things, they're just not as effective.
What concern, if there is any, about how what happened yesterday may play into protests planned for today?
Sure. Each event is a unique event and has to be judged at in and of itself. And I think we look at the circumstances that brought our officers up to that situation are very clear. This is just something that unfolded as a result of a variety of decisions and choices that were made and should have no bearing on the event today. I think it's just, again, looking at the history, I think you've done a pretty good story of chronologically going through each of the events for the past almost 2.5 years since I've been chief. And each one just has a unique circumstance that goes around it. And so while we seek to have these, we still have in that time frame, since I've been chief, well over 400,000 calls for service. And so it's important to stress that the vast majority of the calls we respond to don't have this result of this end, and it's not one we desire.
On the topic of the protests, were the proper permits obtained?
Yeah, the organizer was able to come in, meet with us, and get permits and put together an appropriate route to accomplish what their needs were, and also work with us to make that organizational event happen. So they were able to get a permit.
And what will your guys' presence look like at the protest?
Again, whether it's and I'll speak in generalities because this is not our first protest or thing that we've had, is that we want to facilitate a peaceful and safe protest. And that's also for the people engaging, but we also know sometimes there's outside people who don't always want things to happen. So we look both at the event and the external portion of the event to determine what's necessary, by how many people are there, what the external issues are, and kind of make sure that we protect all people involved. And so our primary goal is safety, and just to make sure that everything goes off smoothly so people can exercise their First Amendment rights in a safe manner and work from there. So a lot of it, again, just kind of as we work through the situation, we're very nimble. We're very able to move, like I said, we devote resources to making sure that it's safe and to make sure that people are safe in their event.
Is that reasoning tied to why the lobby will be closed at 1:00?
Yeah, and that's just to make sure that there's a lot of people that are coming in to do business with the sheriff's office and just regular business. We're trying to just separate some of the traffic on that, right, to make sure that there's a lot of day-to-day stuff, and it can be we want to be able to facilitate First Amendment rights, but we also want to be able to get people who need to do their business in, whether it's civil paperwork or protection orders, records, police questions. Like, we have to just make sure we're creating a space for them to also accomplish the business that they need to do too.
How many people are anticipated to show up for the protest?
The permit organizer put 30 plus, and we don't always know, which I think you saw with the Roe v. Wade one, was we had no idea how to put a finger on how many people were going to be there, which created some issues. And that's where there was no permit for that protest. And we kind of had difficulties because of that, because we had no way to gauge. And then, of course, the huge amount of people that came. Well, this one, again, a permit was filed. We're able to look and see what the organizer tells us. And so we anticipate a group. We just have to kind of be prepared for whatever the spectrum may bring. So,
what entity from the police will be responding to the protests?
Our support services always takes care of those events, and those a lot of times are our parks and traffic officers. That's part of their other duties as assigned. So that's something for every event we've had, and we've had, many, many, many events. someone's just assigned to monitor that, make sure it's safe and facilitate that. But that's the same for our 5Ks too. When somebody gets a permit for a 5K or something like that, we have those officers check in, make sure that it route's safe and different things like that. So that's something they deal with on a regular basis, and they're comfortable dealing with it.
There are some specific demands from the organizers
Yeah.
they're hoping to accomplish. Can you speak to whether any of those demands will be met?
We're fully open to communicating with, and I've already had one conversation with the organizer, and we'll communicate with them in the future. And, I think it's worth noting is with a lot of circumstances where things draw attention, and we'll give them our information as we always do, and kind of be open to them and what their inquiries are. And I think that's something. But again, the other ones we'll work through. We know what's best for our organization. We have a history of holding people accountable for actions. I think you can look back at our history and see very clear distinctions of when we've had to take action with some of our officers. And we trust that the public understands and recognizes that. And again, with all these matters, the things we engage in sometimes become controversial. And I remind people that there's internal measures, that the ultimate judge of our actions or behavior sometimes is through courts. And that's something that we see time and time again. If people feel sometimes that they need to, the court route is their remedy to see if those actions were appropriate. And that's how case law gets set. That's how the Supreme Court has done certain things. And that's how our courts work too. And so we remind people that that's the ultimate venue sometimes for when there is a dispute as to whether or not that should be the way it should be. The courts make those determinations. So it's a good question.
Can you address, just make a statement as to the concern that the protest is centered on, just what your position on that is?
Yeah, and like I said, we'll gather all the information. As I said, I think it was last week. An internal investigation takes all witness accounts, all video that's available. From the night of that incident, our internal review process started. We're gathering information, gathering video, doing that together. We'll push that through our chain of command. We have a system which every use of force is measured and looked at, or whether it's a complaint or not. And then we'll work through that and come back with a determination. In this circumstance too, we talked to DCI pretty early on and just said, hey, this is kind of gaining some public attention. We'd like to have you take a second look at it because, again, pretty common. We've done it in the past. It's not a new operating procedure for us, but just something that we like to be transparent with the public. And that way the public knows that, yeah, we're also looking at this, but somebody else is looking at it too. And again, pretty normal procedure for us in our line of work.
So when those internal findings are complete, will that be something you openly discuss?
We typically don't, right? We'll gauge each situation and see where it goes on how this moves forward and kind of make a determination after that. Like again, sometimes some of the parties involved, right, get information on that, but not the general everybody gets the information on that. So.
It's my understanding the non-lethal munition and stuff.
Yeah.
Just describe that. What is it made of?
So it's basically 40 millimeter. And if you look up a couple, when we first rolled these out, we did a couple of news stories on them. So in the archives, but it's got a foam rubber tip, right? And it basically shoots, I kind of described it as a racquetball tip almost. And then goes out and it separates from anything hard and just comes out as that kind of impact munition that's a little softer than I think people, when they envision rubber bullets, they think of this super hard thing. It's got a soft cone and flies at a certain velocity that will hopefully change people's behavior or minds in such circumstances. And we made an effort to expand that technology and capability. I think if you look at the overall move, there's beanbag shotguns used to be the things, those were determined to be in some circumstances fairly unsafe. The 40 millimeter is the next generation of that, which has addressed some of the safety concerns that the beanbag rounds brought up. And we've made investments in that because we've seen them save lives on the streets before. We've been able to intervene with the 40 millimeter and it's produced compliance, and then it hasn't had to escalate. But like I said, in many circumstances, if somebody is truly motivated or not feeling pain, just speaking in generalities, it isn't always effective. There has to be, nothing works 100% of the time.
Pistol style or shotgun style?
It's about this long and it just looks like a little launcher. it's not a military grade launcher. It's sold specifically for law enforcement purposes and marketed as a law enforcement tool. So, any other questions?
Anything else you'd like to add?
No, like I said, just appreciate the public tuning in on this. We try to, there's a reason I'm here after every one of these events. We want to make sure we get the information out as soon as we can, what we're able to talk about, when we're able to talk about it. And again, we are a professional law enforcement agency who obviously do our best and follow best practices when dealing with these situations, whether it's this or the protest today. We trust that we are there here to serve the people, to make safe events, and also to be communicative when things happen, especially like yesterday's event, that we want to make sure we obviously can only give you a press release at first, but no, we'll always follow it up with what we can give the next day, and certainly steer you towards the process that DCI will follow up with their full investigation, which if you've taken the time to read some of their investigations in the past, they're pretty comprehensive with the information they provide. And we're really fortunate to partner with an agency like that where we can just say, hey, come on in, take this over, and we trust your findings and lean on you in those types of circumstances. So thank you.
All right, back to the log. Are there any questions about anything else that was in the log in the last 24 hours? All right, easy enough. Have a great day.
Thank you.